Welcome back. You are watching or listening to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So every week, Gary asks me the question, what do you want to talk about? And every week, inevitably, there's something that's pretty heavy on my mind. So this week, I have had some more medical stuff on my mind, and it definitely has been weighing on me. And I've been told by multiple people, I was like, well, just assume the best until you know something different, right? As you're waiting for test results, assume the best. Or, don't think about it or don't worry about it. And so what I really wanted to talk about, and I mean this very sincerely, is to process what does it look like not to worry in the practical when you've got some potentially really heavy stuff looming.
Yeah, a couple podcasts ago, we talked about not trying to be ready for or prepared for everything,
Right.
but just be prepared for anything. And that, we don't have complete control or any control, depending on how you want to process that, over outcomes, but we have control over the process. What can we do in the meantime? But I think telling someone not to worry when they've got some heavy stuff going on, that's borderline abuse in some cases, right? It's like, what do you mean don't worry? Can I just turn that off?
Yeah. I know it's meant with really good intentions.
Most of the time, absolutely.
And I know that worry in and of itself is problematic because the more stressed your body is, the more prone you are to disease.
No question.
And so worry is not good. It is not healthy. But the practical application of don't worry when you've got some really heavy stuff on your plate, I'm just curious about what that looks like to do it in a healthy manner. How do you process worry in a place where it doesn't become consuming, where you're giving due diligence to thinking through the potential outcomes of whatever it is that you're facing, but again, not letting it rob you of the time that you have now?
Yeah, so I think you asked a good question there, which is how do you process? And you said process worry. But, many times we have said, think about ahead of the situation. How do you want to respond to something based on your values versus react to something? So how do you want to respond to, adverse medical news or, children's misbehavings or something? How do we want to respond to that? And then how do we want to process that? And I think those are two different questions. Respond is kind of in the moment. Process is over time. And then how do we want to behave out of that, which could be even farther down the line or part of the process. So what can we do to process worry, let's just use that phrase, without causing damage to ourselves or those around us?
Well, that's why I asked you. I was hoping you had some better answers for me.
Well, I'm just trying to reframe the question. I have a colleague who's like just totally, the proper way to come to a solution is to ask the question the right way.
Yes,
right?
yes.
The proper question is what gets you to the answer. So I was just trying to help reframe the question a little bit. But I'm not sure there's an easy answer to it. What is the best way? And this will probably be one of those things that's dependent on the person.
Sure.
Right? On our given personalities, an introvert and an extrovert might process things, I guess by definition, do process things differently. I might want to go talk to a bunch of people about it. An introvert might say, nope, I need to process this internally before I talk to anyone. Although I remember when I had my diagnosis, I didn't want to talk to anybody about it until I had kind of figured out, my own kind of response or reaction, which is a little unusual for me, but it was a heavy thing.
Yeah.
And so, that's the other issue in this. This is the three-dimensional matrix here. It depends on how heavy it is.
Right.
If it's, deciding if you're going to switch from whole dairy milk to oat milk, well, unless that's a medical necessity, that doesn't have the same weight of, I just got a terrible diagnosis. And so it also depends on the weight of the thing or the severity of the problem.
Absolutely.
But how do you process things? Does it come back to the general question of how do you process anything, let alone worry?
Yeah, perhaps. I had my medical encounter on a Friday, and I actually had to go into work the next morning to cover a few hours of a shift. And as I sat there, I get asked the question, "How you doing?" And I'm not a good person to be like, "Fine." I'm not one to pull that card out. And so I paused for a moment. I was trying to decide, what was I actually going to say? How was I going to respond? Because you don't want to just unload all your garbage onto
No.
somebody that you don't have, a close relationship with. And so I had a subdued, honest answer for this guy. And so, but to his credit, he paused and he contemplated what I said. And then he asked me a question in response. He goes, "Well, how do you process?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry. He didn't ask me how I process. He asked me, "What do you like to do in your free time?" That was the first question that he asked me.
Wow.
And so
Okay.
to kind of change the subject, it came back to ultimately, like, can you use that in the processing scenario? But so I said, well, back before my dog had a bad leg, I used to like to walk the dogs a lot. And I said, I used to like to write. And so he really quickly whipped out his phone. He started looking at some stuff online, and then he hands me his phone to show me, there's a bunch of websites that have writing prompts, and there's contests around writing prompts. And so I found that to be really intriguing in the moment, and especially what the question was, or what the writing prompt was. And for this particular site or particular contest, it was, "Well, I didn't see that coming." That was the prompt. And so as I kind of was mulling that over, I went home and I ended up spending some time writing on the prompt, "Well, I didn't see that coming," which by default ended up with me processing some of the news that I had received through the writing exercise. And so
Did it help?
I think it did. I mean, I don't have any solutions, but at least I got it kind of out of the stuck in my brain space into the, digital page space. And to your point about everyone has to determine who they're going to share things with. I was debating, do I go public with this? Do I keep things private? And I've got a public website and stuff like that. And so just trying to make those decisions. Who needs to know my stuff? Who do I process my stuff with? And I, go back to some of the conversations we had in the early days of, my diagnosis last summer. If it helps somebody for me to process live time what I'm walking through so they don't feel so alone, then I think it's worth it for me.
Sure. And especially if it's just useful for your healing process. Let's talk about healing versus worry. But that fascinates me. I'm one who believes there's no accidents. Your colleague at work on a Saturday morning says, "What do you do in your free time?" It's a great, curious question, because if you try to get too analytic, like my engineer brain is like, well, what could bring you peace in a storm, or what could you do? He says, "What do you like to do in your free time?" That's a real easy, practical question that gets to some of the deeper psychological stuff in a very informal and easy, non-threatening way. I love it, actually. And so writing, walking the dogs, how do you process stuff can come back to what brings you peace, what helps you just in general. How do you recreate? Remember the word recreation. We have this word recreation. We're going to go on a vacation. We're going to, we have, things that we do that are recreation. And that really comes from recreation. So how do you recreate from the situation? How do you recreate yourself? How do you recreate your peace? How do you recreate and get ready for the day? This comes back to resiliency and a lot of other things, but he's asking, what do you do for recreation? And how do you recreate? So you've been knocked off the beam, so to speak. How do you get back on? And that's a fascinating, curious question.
I agree. I thought it was spot on with getting me to think in a different way. And, to the point about how do you practically not worry? Well, I would argue that most of us, when we are in our place of recreation, whatever that looks like, we're probably not super worried, right? If your favorite pastime is water skiing, I don't know, maybe there's some degree of worry that you just can't turn off in your brain in terms of there's certain heavy thoughts that you can't escape. but you also have to be very intentional to be in the moment for your personal safety, to be aware of your surroundings, for all of the things. And so by immersing yourself into a recreation space, whether that's writing, watching movies, doing something physically active outdoors, maybe even bordering on the a little bit dangerous side in and of itself, it does do a mental shift.
So so a list of questions is coming to my mind,
Good.
such as, okay, how much time should I worry? Am I worrying too much or too little? Well, one thing that I'm always concerned about is the world's mirror acting upon you. When someone says don't worry, even if it's well-meaning, I think that kind of is doing a disservice, because there is going to be some amount of worry
Sure.
necessary. I mean, that processing time, if you just ignore your feelings and stuff them, that's going to be worse, right? So is processing your feelings worry? I think not. And I think what people usually mean when they say worry, and maybe I could be wrong here, is that you're overthinking it, that you're stressing about it, that you're causing yourself physical or mental harm by thinking about something too much.
Yeah.
So what's the proper amount of worry or processing for me?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good question to ask. Then you can say, okay, let's say it's 10% of my day, right? Of my waking hours, I am awake 16 hours, 1.6 hours, I'm going to worry. Okay, is there a time and a block that I could get my worrying out of the way?
Don't worry between 6 and
So,
7
well,
a.m.
and of course you can't just turn it off and turn it on, because it's feelings and emotions based.
Sure.
But if, let's say you said, okay, I don't want to think about this more than 10% of the time. What if you blocked out 1.6 hours for writing, for gardening, for taking a walk and thinking about it, for sitting down and writing, for research on the web? And then you said, you know what, outside of that time, brain, I'm dealing with this. Because what I think part of the manifestation of worry is your brain is thinking things like, well, what if I miss something because I didn't think about this?
Right.
Or what if I don't know about this treatment? Or what if I don't know about this? How could I intervene for my own benefit? Well, if you say, look, I'm going to spend 1.6 hours today, 10% of my waking time, and I'm going to not worry about worrying. I'm going to worry full on. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to do my research. I'm going to go to WebMD, even though every doctor in the country will tell you not to do that. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to write about it. I'm going to scream. I'm going to do whatever for 1.6 hours. And I'm going to schedule it out. And then you know what? The rest of the day, I'm kind of free to do other things.
That is a fascinating approach.
I don't know that it would work.
I don't either, but it gives me a lot to think about.
It's a way, right? And then but then it comes from those curious questions. That solution may or may not work, but that's not the important part. The important part is to ask the questions. So what is worry to me? Am I worrying too much? What's the proper amount of time for worrying? Can I control or schedule or manage, is not the right word, my worry into ways that it's not harmful to me physically, mentally, or to the people around me?
Yeah, productive worry.
So asking those questions and then thinking about it, writing if necessary or as necessary, may be part of the solution. But again, it's going back to those questions that we don't usually do. We usually, like, someone says, don't worry, and you look at them and go,
yeah, whatever.
Whatever. I mean, how can you tell me not to worry? That's so insensitive to what I'm going through. And then you move on. But we don't do that extra step of thinking more deeply about it.
Yeah. I love that. I think those are all really good things to ponder and to consider what that looks like in my practical application. I was having a very early morning conversation with my daughter. I think this is okay to share, but she said something like, she'd gone out with friends and spent a big part of the day doing stuff, and she goes, I didn't think about it at all. Is that okay? But I mean, and she's not a small child. She's a grown adult. And she was asking me, for permission. Is it okay that I'm not thinking about this all the time? And she said to me, I feel kind of guilty if I'm not thinking about it more. And it's a bizarre weight that we put on ourselves and maybe even put on others. Like, this is my potentially bad news. everyone, rally around me and stew in this with me. And I hope I don't project that way, and I hope that wasn't anything that I communicated, but I think there's the danger in that.
But it's a very natural reaction, though. I mean, I know that, we certainly don't communicate, my wife and I, if we go out and have a good time or do something fun right now, we're not telling her family because her father's going through some pretty severe medical issues. And so it's like, wait a minute, you almost think to yourself, they're going to think, so talk about double projection here. They're going to think, how can you go out and have fun when we're all
Dealing with
going
this,
through this?
yeah.
That's a very legitimate question. And is the world supposed to stop? And so I think that's first of all, very honest of your daughter to say that. Very cool, actually, that's a conversation you're having. But you might just say to her, hey, I'd appreciate it if you think of me, a few minutes a day, every once in a while, but certainly don't run your life by that. And I want you to have fun and not be stressed because, and not to over worry, because, that's not going to help me. And it may affect your well-being, your friendships, your overall life. That's interesting because, from your conversation, it feels like you're more worried about her worrying than you worrying, which I tend to do.
Sure.
Right?
Well, and I think as parents or grandparents, what you want is you want the best for your, next generations. And so, I hope and I pray it doesn't come to something very serious where I'm facing a premature end of life. But if that were to happen, I don't want my family left behind to be caught in this place of agony and despair and like my mom's gone or whatever. Like I don't want them to fall into this pit where they can't get out. I want them to live a full, robust life. And of course, we all want to be thought of. We want to be remembered. We want to be honored. But I would hope that most people don't want their loved ones to be left behind clutching to the what ifs if only a different outcome had been the reality.
No, or a bucket of worry or anxiousness or all of that. We want people to move on. I remember when I was going through my diagnosis, I have said to people since then that I think it was literally harder on my family than it was on me because they couldn't do anything.
Sure.
I could at least control, make sure I got to the right doctors, got to the right opinions, did my research on WebMD, went and bought some books, right? And of course, my disease process was something very common. And so there's been lots of books. I say there's a library on it. There's no way to research it all. But I had control, seemingly during that time. I felt like I had more control over my process than they did. They couldn't do anything. They felt helpless.
Yeah.
And so, and maybe that's a little bit of our own self-worry too. Are we feeling helpless? Are we feeling like, if I don't worry, I'm not in control?
I absolutely can say yes for me. I know when it's not my own stuff, when it's somebody else's stuff, if I'm not worried about them, because I can't directly impact the outcome of whatever it is that they're doing, like especially if it's bad choices of children, if I don't worry about it, I feel like I have stopped caring or I've removed myself from the equation. And so to worry in a twisted, weird way in my brain means that I am at least proactively doing something in the situation.
Which comes back to control. That's interesting. And equating worry with care is an interesting concept too. So if I don't worry about someone, then I don't care about them.
Well,
that's
I'm
interesting.
I'm not saying that that's a true statement, but I'm saying I think sometimes we get those things muddled up
Absolutely,
in our mind.
We do. Yeah. And we conflate the two. Or we think that the very act of worrying will affect the outcome.
Yeah.
Which is probably not true in most cases.
Right. Me exerting my emotional energy into this is going to somehow dictate, a different course.
Yeah, and we've all talked about, what's the phrase these days, helicopter moms, and, people who are constantly, or parents who are constantly, surrounding their kids with bubble wrap and making sure that nothing bad happens to them, and, those kinds of things. And then we don't experience life. So let's turn that around. are we doing that with ourselves with worry? Are we putting bubble wrap around? Are we not? Are we using worry to not feel? I was thinking about worry as dealing with feelings. Maybe worry is actually counterproductive because we're not dealing with our feelings. We're trying to control our feelings by worrying instead of dealing with them.
Well, and it does seem a little, to me, disingenuous if I go about my merry life and go and do something fun and go celebrate something like, oh yeah, I'm waiting for that test result that could really upend my life, right? And so it is this cognitive dissonance, which we just talked about in the brain, between waiting for some potential bad news and living life and experiencing joy.
Now, I just was watching a movie recently where the protagonist, the main character in the story, was in a hospice, and they were going to go do something that brought them joy, and it got to be to the point of what normal people, or excuse me, the casual observer, the script writer was specifically doing this intentionally, to where the person was doing ridiculous things to do this. But then, you get the very sense of, look, they're on hospice. They're doing this because it's going to bring them joy, clearly. And isn't that a good thing? So, you said, well, maybe I wouldn't go off and do a certain thing because I should be more concerned about, fixing this thing. Maybe it is a time to just do things that bring you joy. Maybe you don't cut those things out of your life when you're worried. Maybe you triple them.
Yeah, pursue them intentionally.
What's the old saying I heard at church? I can't remember, something about prayer. It's like, okay, I don't know how I would pray 20 minutes a day. It's like, no, you should be praying 40 minutes. In other words, can we?
Oh, I can't afford to pray 20 minutes a day.
Yes. So it should be 40.
Can't afford not to, something like that.
Yeah. And so, well then, maybe that's the thing. Maybe you need to schedule more things that bring you joy, which makes your friend's question even more germane. What do you enjoy doing in your free time? This person's thing was, I want pizza. I want pizza from New York, this one New York place called Patsy's Pizza. And I need pizza from there.
Yeah.
And maybe what we do is we say, okay, what are the things that bring me joy, and double up on those.
Good, curious questions. So I hope this has prompted some curiosity in you. And if you've got some thoughts about navigating worry, we'd love to hear from you. You are always welcome to drop us a line at curiositynotjudgment.com. And of course, we have the YouTube channel where you can leave comments there as well. As I've shared in the past, if you leave comments on any of the audio sites, I likely won't see them because I use a distribution site and somehow those comments never get back to me. But YouTube or the website are your two best bets if you want to reach us. So as always, appreciate you listening, appreciate you caring, appreciate you asking good questions, and of course, staying curious.
Don't worry, be happy.
Yeah. I don't know if that was the conclusion.
No, take care.
All right, we'll see y'all later.